The land had been dry for so long, it had forgotten how to bleed. At least, that's what the old surveyor muttered, when we broke ground near a remote desert canyon in northern Arizona. A place so barren that even the GPS stammered as we approached. The company labeled it Parcel 23, just another grid square on some corporate spreadsheet. But to everyone on the crew, it was hollow lot. Nothing grew there, no birds circled overhead. Even the wind seemed to skirt its edges, as if it knew better than to trespass. I was the newest hire, though far from green. 15 years in construction, residential builds, high-rise contracts, even a few government contracts. But I'd never seen soil like this. It looked wrong, like it had been laid down yesterday, by something that didn't understand how dirt was supposed to behave. Clay too red, gravel too black. And when the excavators began cutting into it, they sparked. This was as if the earth itself objected. Bossman, real name Vernon, just waved it off. Soil's got iron in it. That's all. But he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes when he said it. There were 22 of us in total, split evenly between rotating day and night crews. The day shift handled foundation pours, trench lines, rebar framing. The night crew, my crew, was mostly tasked with site surveillance and after-hours groundwork. Officially, that meant keeping the place secure from vandals or squatters. Unofficially, we were the ones assigned to handle whatever the day crew refused to touch after sundown. The job paid double scale plus a bonus after every completed week. No one asked why. On my first night, they handed me a folder, unmarked, save for a single word in permanent marker, protocol. Inside were 2 pages. One was a typed list of rules. The other, a liability waiver already signed. My name neatly printed at the top. But I don't remember signing it. I still have that first list. I memorized every word. Even now, it gives me a chill. Night Crew Protocol, Parcel 23. Do not lose this sheet. Rule 1. If you hear knocking from underground, count to 10 before responding. Do not knock back. Rule 2. Never follow the chalk arrows after midnight. They were not drawn by us. Rule 3. If you see a door in the ground, do not open it. Walk away. Inform Vernon if he's reachable. Rule 4. Do not speak the names of your coworkers more than once an hour. Something listens. Rule 5. If you're working near the perimeter and feel like you're being watched, step into the floodlight and do not move until the feeling passes. Rule 6. If anyone from the day crew shows up during your shift, ask for their site code. If they hesitate, run. Rule 7. If a Native American with a torn, rotten face appears before you, spill your blood. Only then will he leave. Rule 8. If you see pale, mutilated hands rising from the ground, activate the siren and take cover. I thought it was some sick hazing ritual or a silly joke. Construction crews can be superstitious. Don't bury bottles in wet cement. Don't whistle in unfinished rooms. But this was another level of strange. Yet when I glanced around that first night, none of the other guys laughed. Santiago crossed himself 3 times after reading it. Ray lit a cigarette and muttered, "Hope you brought a second pair of boots. First pair always disappears." No one offered a handshake, no one said welcome. The land wasn't dry anymore, not after we started digging. And the deeper we went, the more it felt like something was waiting for us to open the wrong door. The trailer reeked of stale coffee, chain-smoked cigarettes, and something older, more elusive, like wet concrete left to rot under a forgotten sky. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The floodlights outside cut off with a soft hum, and silence settled in like a weight, thick and immediate. A corkboard sagged on the far wall, overwhelmed by layers of duct-taped notes, yellowed safety memos, and warnings scribbled in a dozen different hands. Next to it hung a black and white photo warped with age. The crew from Parcel 23, circa the 1970s. Their faces were sharp but wrong, eyes empty like something had scooped out what made them human and left the rest to finish the job. Vernon sat behind a dented metal desk, half submerged in shadow. A topographic map was unfurled before him, its lines crowded with hand-drawn annotations and red slashes. One hand cradled a stained coffee mug, The other rested on a folded manila envelope. His eyes, red-rimmed and sleepless, flicked up at me like a motion detector had gone off. "You read the protocol?" he asked, voice gravel ground in bourbon. "Yeah," I said, "twice." He leaned back, chair creaking under the weight of whatever he carried on his shoulders. "Most don't read it once. They think it's hazing. Campfire bullshit stories for blue-collar guys." He let out a humorless snort. "But you read it twice. That's why you're still breathing." I sat across from him. My knees brushed against something beneath the table. Tools? Bones? I didn't check. "Look," he continued, sliding the envelope across the desk with a long dirty nail. "I don't know what kind of sites you've worked before, but this land, it doesn't care about unions, occupational safety and health administration, or your God. It's old, mean, and it remembers." I opened the envelope. Inside were Polaroids, blurred, overexposed images that made my stomach twist. One showed clawed hands rising from cracked concrete. Another, a man standing beside a door that hadn't existed in the previous frame. One shot captured a chalk arrow pointing into a trench that wasn't marked on any blueprint I'd seen. The final photo stunned me. A severed finger resting on rebar, its nail chewed to the quick. "That last one was Freddy," Vernon said deadpan. He didn't listen. Said the chalk markings were just prank graffiti. He followed one right out of his shift and we never found Freddy or what was left of him. Vernon stood and walked to a filing cabinet, opening it with a hiss of rusted metal. From the drawer, he pulled a thick black binder and dropped it onto the desk. A soft cloud of dust rose and hung there, as if the air itself didn't want to breathe it in. "These are the logs," he said. "Every incident since '68, every rule broken, every price we paid. This binder doesn't lie and doesn't forgive." I reached for it, but he shook his head. "Not yet, not until you've seen it yourself." Before I could speak, a klaxon outside gave a single sharp bleat. Not an alarm, just a warning. A motion sensor tripped somewhere near the western trench. Vernon didn't flinch. "Grab your gear, stay in the floodlights. Don't talk to anyone who doesn't cast a shadow. I'll check the feeds." I stood and turned toward the door. My hand was on the knob when he spoke again, quieter now, like the words themselves had weight. "One more thing, rookie." I looked back. "If you hear knocking from underground, count to 10. Not 9 or 11, exactly 10. Then walk away and never knock back." He watched me for a second longer, gaze steady and unreadable, as if committing my face to memory for the records, and turned back to the map like nothing had changed. I stepped into the western trench with the bitter chill of Vernon's warning still lodged behind my ribs. The wind had died, leaving only low electric buzz of the floodlights. Rebar jutted from the half-cured concrete like rusted ribs, skeletal and sharp. Ahead, between two support pylons, I spotted Eddie, crouched by the foundation line. His flashlight angled into a thin fissure in the slab. Eddie was young, maybe 22, and still had too much energy for this kind of job. He hadn't read the rules. I could tell by the way he kept saying my name. Connor, man, come check this out." Thought I heard tapping or something. "Maybe we've got a leak down here." I froze. He'd said my name twice out loud in less than a minute. I looked around. The trench was empty but felt wrong, like something had been here and left its breath behind. I moved closer but stayed outside the beam of Eddie's flashlight. "Don't say my name again," I muttered. "And back away from that crack." Eddie scoffed. "Dude, what's with you? You and Vernon both acting like we're on an exorcism site." As he turned toward me, I noticed something behind him. No more than a shape at first. Something lank and pale, hugging the edge of the trench wall where the cement hadn't fully cured. It looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the head too flat. No eyes, just a wide black crescent of a mouth, stretched in a grin that didn't belong to anything alive. I blinked, and it was gone. Eddie kept talking. "I swear, I just heard it, like 3 slow knocks under the dirt. I thought maybe pipes or..." He was about to say my name again, the third time, I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him into the nearest floodlight zone. The trench behind us hissed, as if the rebar itself had taken offense. "You say my name one more time and you'll need a priest for last rites," I snapped. "Now shut up and listen." I pulled the protocol sheet from my pocket, creased, sweat-stained already, and shoved it in his hands. "Read it right now." He started skimming it, muttering under his breath. His expression shifted from amused to confused, then to something like dread. "Wait," he said, "this part about knocking?" We both heard it at the same time. 3 dull knocks, muffled by dirt and reinforced concrete, but undeniably real. Right beneath our boots. We stood frozen. I counted in my head. My mouth went dry at 6, 7, 8. I almost said something at 9, but Vernon's voice, sharp and precise, came back to me, exactly 10. The moment I reached it, the knocking stopped. No echo or aftermath. Just the cold and that gnawing hum of the lights. Eddie hadn't counted. He took a step forward, leaned down and, God help him, raised a fist like he was going to respond. "Stop!" I hissed. "Don't touch it!" His fingers hovered inches above the dirt. His eyes were cloudy, like he wasn't really seeing me anymore. Then the earth shifted, just a tremor at first, but it was enough to send a hairline crack, darting along the concrete slab beneath us. And from that crack came a slow rising sound, like something inhaling through stone lungs. I pulled him back. The crack sealed behind us with a brittle click of a lock turning from the other side. Eddie collapsed to his knees, gasping. He looked at me like he wanted to say something. I shook my head. "No names, no questions. Just read the rules, memorize them, and pray that crack doesn't open again." He nodded, silent for once. His hands were shaking. So were mine. Up above, the security floodlight blinked twice, then buzzed back to life. Eddie kept close after that. We didn't talk much that night. Not after what we heard beneath the trench. I could feel Eddie behind me, flinching at every sudden gust or shifting gravel. Each footstep just a half-beat late. We made our way to the generator shack by the east rig. The lights had started stuttering. Slow pulses like a dying heartbeat. Vernon said the lights were our last line of defense, though he never explained what we were defending against. The generator sat on the edge of Parcel 23, close to the fence line, if you could even call it that. A jagged perimeter of rebar and dying sodium lights. Beyond them was just prairie, flat and black as oil. That's when we saw the arrows, chalk white, freshly drawn on the dirt. They hadn't been there during our last patrol. Not that either of us said it aloud. 5 arrows in a silent row, all pointing away from the site, into the open scrubland. Too perfect and clean. The kind of lines you don't get unless you're drawing from a still hand and complete silence. I held up the rule sheet. Rule 2. After midnight, we don't follow chalk arrows. They weren't drawn by us. Eddie stepped toward them. "Man," I called. "Look at the time. 12:58 a.m. Eddie stared at the arrows for a long time. I could see the struggle behind his eyes. The need to explain things away, to tell himself some foreman marked those for surveying, or maybe someone on the day crew got sloppy. It's the curse of working this job too young. You still believe in reasons. You still think everything means something rational. Then we heard measured, heavy footsteps, crunching gravel beyond the light perimeter. "Day crew?" Eddie whispered, already knowing the answer. "No one's out here this late." Someone was approaching. I could just make out the silhouette now. It was hard to tell, but something was wrong with the posture. The arms didn't swing, the head didn't bob. It just glided, like it wasn't stepping across the dirt so much as being pulled forward. As it got closer, the outline sharpened. I saw what it was. Not a man, mannequin. One of the CPR dummies from the safety trailer. It had been dressed in someone's reflective vest and mounted upright on a thin rod of rebar. The pole scraped softly along the gravel as it moved, pulled from behind by something we couldn't see. It came to a stop just past the 5th arrow. Eddie gagged in revulsion. The dummy's mouth had been stuffed with chalk. Thick broken sticks jammed between the teeth and down into the throat. as if it had tried to scream, and someone had silenced it, using the very thing it had tried to draw with. "Back up," I whispered. "Don't break line of sight." We retreated in sync, slow and controlled. I slipped a hand into my jacket and brushed my fingers against the siren tab. A cheap red trigger Vernon made us carry, no bigger than a key fob. I didn't pull it, not yet. We kept our eyes on the dummy. It didn't move, not even when the wind kicked up and tore dust across the lot. It just stood there like a question. We turned the corner and slipped behind the nearest container wall. I risked one glance back. The arrows were gone. No footprints, no chalk, just undisturbed dirt, as if the whole thing had been erased. But the dummy was still there, facing the site. Suddenly, the knock came from inside the container, soft but precise. 3 raps, far enough apart to suggest intent. It wasn't the kind of staccato you'd get from wind or the creak of metal cooling in the night. This was patient and purposeful, human perhaps, or something that wanted us to think so. The container loomed in the dark, rust-streaked and ominous. 23B was stenciled in faded yellow across its side, like a forgotten warning. They hadn't opened it in weeks. Vernon kept the padlocks tight, and only 2 of us had keys. Him and apparently whoever or whatever was now knocking from inside. I drew my flashlight and swept the beam over the latch. Still locked. "Could be a raccoon?" Eddie offered, though his voice betrayed him. Thin and tremulous, more hope than conviction. He stepped forward anyway, resting his palm against the metal siding. Then he yanked his hand back, like it had been scalded. "What?" I whispered, heart already quickening. "It's warm," he muttered. I pressed my fingers to the surface. He was right. Not just warm, radiating heat from within, like something had been simmering behind the steel walls. The kind of heat that didn't come from sun or air. Then we heard 3 more knocks, slower this time. Between the knocks, I heard a dry, rasping breath, dragging itself across the thin veil of metal. It was close, right against the wall. I took a step back. Enough was enough. "We go to Vernon," I said. "Right now." That's when the radio on my belt crackled to life with breathing, deep and congested, right in our ears. I snatched it from my hip. "Vernon? You copy." A voice came through the radio. "Third door," it whispered. Eddie stared at the radio like it had spoken directly into his skull. "What the hell does that mean?" I didn't answer because I recognized the voice. It had a distorted quality, like a bad recording. But under that, it sounded like me. My cadence, my drawl. As if someone who had heard me speak once tried to recreate it from memory. Behind us, the container let out a long metallic groan. When we turned around, the padlock was gone. The latch dangled loose, swaying gently, like something had just passed through or was inviting us in. I raised the flashlight and swept it across the entrance. At first, it looked like any other storage container. Dusty shelves, tarps, a few old gas cans. But then I saw the markings. Dozens of chalk arrows, etched directly into the metal walls in thick curling lines, all pointing toward the back. And there, in the rear corner, was a hatch bolted to the floor. No handle, just a single vertical slit. Cold metal ringed it like teeth waiting to bite. Above the hatch, someone had scrawled a message in thick black marker. "Do not open unless instructed. V. We're not supposed to be here," I muttered. "This isn't for us." "Shut it," Eddie hissed. But before I could reach for the door, something began to rise from the hatch. A low whine of shifting metal as the seal began to rotate on its own. The sound reminded me of an old meat grinder, the kind my grandfather used. Something about it triggered a memory I didn't know I had. Blood on concrete and something flapping beneath it. Then the smell hit us, rot, mold, earth, like a grave had been cracked open deep beneath the container, and something inside was stirring. I slammed the container door shut and jammed a rusted crowbar through the latch. We backed away without speaking until we reached the floodlight tower. Eddie dropped to his knees beneath the harsh glare, gasping like he'd outrun a nightmare. "We have to report this," I said, my voice brittle. "To who?" Eddie snapped. Vernon's not answering. Then I noticed something strange in the dirt just beyond the light. Boot prints, fresh and deep. The tread was reversed, each step facing the direction it came from, as though someone had walked backward from the container toward us. Eddie followed my gaze and paled. "Listen to me," I said, trying to make my voice sound as convincing as possible. "Go to the trailer, find Vernon, and tell him everything we saw. I'll check the southern perimeter and get back to you. Keep your radio handy." Eddie nodded his head in fright and hurried to the trailer. The wind had died completely. A hollow stillness had settled over the site, the kind that follows a scream, or maybe precedes one. Every sound had vanished, except the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. No radios crackling, no distant hum of equipment. Just me and the dark, pressing in on all sides. I walked the edge of the gravel road, angling toward the generator lights, staked into the ground near the west perimeter, where they usually pointed toward the forest, just beyond the concrete retaining wall. Out there, the night felt denser, like the sky had sagged lower, and the tree line had inched forward while no one was looking. At that moment, I felt a subtle tingling, prickled across the nape of my neck, spreading outward like static crawling under my skin. It wasn't pain exactly, more like the echo of it, the body's premonition, an unshakable instinct that something is wrong. And then the immediate sensation of being watched. I stopped walking and didn't call out. The feeling was coming from the forest, somewhere just beyond the chain link barrier, behind the gnarled trunks and twisted limbs that grew too close together for anything to pass through without breaking a dozen branches. The trees were motionless. The leaves didn't rustle, but I knew something was in there. I could feel it drilling its attention into me, like an eye had opened within the woods and was staring directly into the back of my skull. Rule 5. If you're working near the perimeter and feel like you're being watched, step into the floodlight and do not move until the feeling passes. There was a generator floodlight just 15 feet ahead. Its cone of brightness splashed across the gravel like a makeshift sanctuary. I moved toward it slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself resisted motion. My shadow grew with every pace, stretching out toward the forest. Behind me, I imagined limbs shifting, barely glimpsed shapes flickering at the edges of vision, always out of sight. When I stepped fully into the circle of light, the cold vanished instantly. The weight of that invisible attention, the one threading itself into my bones, lifted, like a hook had been removed from the base of my spine. I stood still, breathing through my nose. Sweat had pooled in the small of my back, but I didn't move to wipe it away. Didn't reach for my radio. I simply stood inside that circle of illumination, obeying the rule like it was gospel. The sensation began to fade, as if the forest had blinked, and in that blink, I was allowed to exist again. I could hear sound returning. The buzz of insects, the low hum of the floodlight's ballast, even the faint warble of the radio loop from the east side. A voice crackled across the comm clipped to my vest, barely audible. "Connor, you copy?" It was Eddie, but there was something off. His voice didn't sound right. The way he said my name. There was no background noise, no echo or a delay, just a blankness, like the voice was coming from a vacuum. He repeated my name, each repetition thinner, as if it was losing cohesion, unraveling into silence. I didn't respond until the invisible thread that had stitched me to the forest had frayed completely. Only then did I lift the mic to my mouth and keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" "I'm in the trailer. Vernon isn't here." Eddie's voice sounded normal now. "Why did you say my name over and over again? Don't you understand anything?" I asked. "What? What are you talking about? I was just about to contact you, but you beat me to it." My face turned to stone. "Forget it. I'm going back to the trailer right now," I mumbled and stepped into the darkness. I didn't sleep much after what happened under the floodlight. That awareness of being watched had followed me home, like smoke clinging to my clothes. Even in daylight, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, checking corners too small to hide anything. Eddie didn't talk about it either. When I picked him up for the next shift, he just climbed into the truck without a word. Eddie stared straight ahead, like he hadn't left the site at all. When we arrived at Parcel 23, the fog was gone, but the stillness had deepened, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you realize how much noise the world usually makes. There was a smell in the air too. Not rot, not gas. More like wet earth disturbed too suddenly. Vernon still hadn't shown. Second night in a row. There was no message, no explanation. Just the clipboard on the table in the security trailer and the fresh list of assignments. I didn't like that. Vernon might have been a grizzled old bastard, but he'd never skip a shift without warning. Still, we had our job to do. We geared up in silence and split the perimeter like usual. Eddie headed north. I took the southern line. Both of us pretending we were fine. Neither of us believing it. I was maybe half an hour into my sweep when I saw him. A guy dressed in a day crew vest, bright orange with the Parcel 23 emblem stamped on the back, was walking along the southern access path near the concrete pour line. He looked legit, but something about the way he walked set me on edge. His stride was too smooth, like he was gliding rather than walking. Day crew doesn't show up this late, and especially not alone. I picked up my pace, keeping one hand near the shaft of my flashlight, the other brushing the edge of my pocket. "Hey!" I called out, letting authority edge into my voice. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He turned slowly. I swear, I've never seen a face that clean out here. No sweat, no trace of the wind-blown grit that coated the rest of us after 10 minutes outside. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the site lighting. I stopped 10 feet from him and took out the protocol sheet from my back pocket, just to be sure. My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. "What's your site code?" He didn't answer at first, just stood there, blinking like I'd asked him to solve a riddle. I repeated it louder this time. "What's your site code?" He bared his teeth and without a word stepped forward. I ran, bolted back toward the main site, heart kicking against my ribs like it wanted out. I could hear him behind me. No footfalls, just a breath. A wheezing excitement, like something playing tag with a meat puppet. I reached the central scaffold and ducked into the supply trailer, slamming the door shut behind me. High up on the wall, near the tiny ventilation slit, I heard scraping, like fingernails testing the edges. I stayed there for what felt like 20 minutes. I couldn't bring myself to call Eddie, couldn't risk speaking his name again so soon. When I finally pulled myself together and stepped outside, the path was empty. No figure, only a clean hard hat, lying near the concrete pour line, as if it had never been worn at all. The rest of the shift unraveled in disjointed fragments. Brief bursts of motion, followed by long shivering pauses where I strained to hear that breath again. Eddie radioed in twice, said he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary, but his voice lacked conviction. It was thin and hollow, like he didn't really expect me to respond. When dawn finally broke over Parcel 23, it felt staged. The light was clean and absolute, painting over shadows without erasing what they'd concealed, like a cheap trick meant to pacify children. But the wrongness clung to us. I saw it in Eddie's eyes when we rode back to town, saw it in the way he kept scratching at his arms, like something had touched him and wouldn't wash off. The next night, Vernon still didn't show. That was 3 shifts in a row. And by then, the silence of his absence had curdled into something heavier, like we were being groomed into forgetting he'd ever existed. The fog was back again too, thicker this time. Our boots vanished below the knees as we walked, swallowed by the mist that coiled around rebar. We split the site like always, but my nerves were frayed. I kept flinching at creaks in the scaffolding, sudden groans of rebar cooling, the distant hiss of wind through hollow beams. Midway through my perimeter check, I caught sight of someone just beyond the eastern trench, half obscured by fog, standing still. I approached slowly, my flashlight cut through the mist in slices. The figure didn't move. When I got closer, I saw he wasn't wearing our uniform, just ragged layers of suede and torn cloth, soaked with something dark around the edges. Feathers hung from his shoulders, matted and ruined. One foot was bare, the other wrapped in animal hide. His skin looked stretched too tight in some places and sagging in others, patchwork of decay. And his face, Jesus. His face looked like it had been torn apart and stitched back together by someone who didn't understand anatomy. The jaw hung crooked and low, pulling the mouth into a lopsided grimace. Part of the cheek had sloughed away, revealing yellow teeth and a line of splintered bone. His eyes were black, pits that drank the light. He raised one hand, palm up. My fingers tingled with cold. I reached for the protocol sheet with shaking hands, forcing myself to read what I already knew. Rule 7. If a Native American with a torn, rotten face appears before you, spill your blood. Only then will he leave. This time, I didn't hesitate. I fumbled for the utility knife clipped to my belt, flipped it open, and dragged the blade across my palm. The pain was sharp, almost grounding. Blood welled up immediately, running down my wrist and dripping onto the concrete. The moment the first drop hit the ground, he vanished. Where he'd stood, seared into the concrete in lines of soot and ash, was a symbol, a jagged wheel with 7 uneven spokes, intersected by a downward-pointing triangle. I staggered back, wrapping my bleeding hand in an old bandana, pulled from my back pocket. Heart hammered like it was trying to carve its way out. The pain meant I was alive. I couldn't stop thinking. The blood had worked, which meant he hadn't come to kill me. He'd come to ask for something and I'd agreed. Every line on that protocol sheet might be absurd, but they worked. They were keeping us alive. The bleeding stopped around 2:30 a.m. My hand was stiff, the bandana soaked and sticky, but I didn't feel pain anymore, just the strange weight of what I'd done. Eddie was on the far side of the drill platform, checking the fuel gauge with his flashlight. I was alone at the perimeter spool, pretending to inspect a junction box I'd already checked twice. My skin still crawled from what I'd felt earlier. The itch had grown stronger. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. The kind you feel just before a wound starts bleeding again. That's when the ground cracked. A clean dry pop like a knuckle being pulled out of joint. I froze and glanced down. The soil around my boots was shifting, like something underneath was trying to shrug off a blanket. Another pop echoed farther down the path, followed by another. I took a step back, instinct overriding curiosity, and saw the fingers, thin and filthy, unmoving at first. They rose an inch at a time, pale and warped, as if they'd spent a century underwater. Skin bloated and bursting at the seams. Some were missing nails. Others had too many joints. One pair twisted around each other, like branches braided into a knot. I couldn't move. A full hand broke the surface a few feet from me. Then another just past it. They weren't clawing upward in desperation. They were reaching, like plants toward sunlight or supplicants toward a god. Controlled and intentional. I fumbled with the radio. My fingers wouldn't grip the button. A burst of static tore through the channel, followed by Eddie's voice. "Connor? You good?" I couldn't answer. My eyes were locked on the closest hand. It had 6 fingers, each one stitched at the base with black thread that hadn't rotted away. It was no more than 2 feet from my boot. I remembered the rule. If you see pale, mutilated hands rising from the ground, activate the siren and take cover. The siren was mounted on the north scaffolding. Without thinking, I turned and bolted, nearly tripping over the loose coils of cable underfoot. My lungs strained to breathe air that now tasted like burnt plastic and wet copper. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if they were following. I reached the base panel and slammed my palm against the red switch. The siren screamed. Not a clean alarm. Something closer to a scream, chopped up by metal blades, warped by decades of corrosion. It echoed across the dirt like it had been there before the scaffold was even built. Eddie was already sprinting from the other side of the platform. I followed him to the central bunker, a squat concrete shell with rusted steel reinforcements. We slammed the door and waited. The siren went on for 27 seconds, then stopped like a throat being clamped shut mid-scream. Silence returned, but the air outside felt crowded, as if 100 invisible bodies were pressed just outside the walls. Neither of us spoke. We sat in the dark, the only light coming from a flickering emergency strip above the door. Then, barely audible, Eddie whispered, "You saw them too?" I didn't respond. Instead, I leaned my forehead against the cold wall. All I could see behind my eyelids were those fingers, stitched, swollen, and slowly curling toward the night sky. The morning after the third shift, the sun barely rose. It hung low over Parcel 23 like an apology. Pale, sickly, almost ashamed of itself. The crew trailer felt colder than usual, and none of us spoke. Eddie just poured himself a coffee he wouldn't drink and stared at a spot on the wall, like he was trying to remember something he was never supposed to forget. I showered twice. Couldn't get the smell of dirt out of my skin. It clung to me, clay-rich soil soaked in old blood. The kind of scent that gets into the back of your throat and stays there, like a memory you can't swallow. By noon, while Eddie snored softly in the bunk beside mine, I slipped out of the trailer and made my way back to the scaffold, where the siren switch was mounted. My boots left no tracks in the dust, though the ground was soft. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. A hole in the ground, as if the abyss itself were peering right into your soul through it. But it hadn't been there the night before. I would have noticed. I hesitated, hearing the rule echo in my skull. If you see a door in the ground, do not open it. Walk away. Inform Vernon, if he's reachable. But this wasn't the door. Beneath was a ladder, descending into darkness. I flicked on my headlamp, the beam slicing into the void, and climbed down without letting myself think about what I was doing. Each rung felt colder than the last. The shaft narrowed as I went. Earth gave way to poured concrete. Then the walls turned black, charred, but not from fire. I started to hear it again, the scraping breath beneath the surface. At the bottom, I found a corridor that didn't belong under a construction site. No pipes, no wiring, just smooth obsidian walls, carved with shallow depressions. I ran my fingers over the grooves and realized they matched the layout of the site. The trenches, the scaffold points, even the trailer placement. A perfect diagram etched in stone long before we broke ground. But there were things on the map we hadn't built. A spiral of circles, a second vault. A series of thin lines connecting the perimeter to the door I wasn't supposed to open. And at the very center, beneath where we'd installed the drill rig, was a sigil I didn't recognize. A crude eye with a vertical slit through it and 5 tally marks. I didn't have time to think before I heard footsteps. Bare feet on stone, wet and slow. I spun fast, beam slicing through the corridor. A shirtless man, if you could call him that, stood just a few feet away. Skin so thin I could see the bones beneath it, like rebar beneath cracked cement. His mouth had been sewn shut with rusted wire. Eyes gone, just empty sockets filled with dirt. He held out a sheet of paper. Slowly, I reached forward and took it. It was a set of rules. Not the one Vernon gave us. Not the one Eddie and I kept folded in our pockets like a lifeline. This one was handwritten, older, burnt at the edges. Some rules mirrored ours. Others were different. The final rule was scrawled in trembling block letters. Do not dig deeper. It is not asleep and it wants your soul. When I looked back up, the man was gone. So was the ladder. I don't remember climbing out. I don't remember returning to the surface. All I know is that I found myself sitting outside the trailer, dirt under my nails, blood on my palms, the rule sheet folded neatly in my lap. Vernon stood on the porch steps with a cigarette in his mouth. His face looked hollow. I figured it out, I said quietly. You knew. He took a long drag, let the smoke leak out through his nose. I didn't build this site. None of us. Not really. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, Vernon looked afraid. This place was chosen, bought by people who don't ask questions. They get a permit, ship in the crew, and drop us onto the land like a needle in a vein. We don't build anything. Our job is to cover. Cover what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ancient things, and they're very hungry. Things that used to be gods before we forgot their names. He took another drag, then handed me the clipboard. I took over after my predecessor vanished in '98, he said. He left behind a rule sheet, same one I gave you, same one he got from the guy before him. It's how we contain it. He looked at me with something between grief and resolve. "Kid, I'm done," he said finally. "I felt it coming, like a crack in a dam. I can't hold the line anymore. But someone's always got to be here when it tries to crawl up. Someone who knows the rules. Someone who follows them." I shook my head. "I'm not." "Yes," he said, cutting me off. "You are. You've seen what's beneath. And you didn't break the rules. What do I have to do?" I asked, even though some part of me was already screaming not to ask that. Vernon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing at first. Just watch, keep the rules close. Make sure the others don't dig where they shouldn't. The sight'll test you, try to pull you deeper. You let it know you're watching, it stays down. I told the crew to clear out tomorrow. Said we found a gas leak. Gave them all a paid day off. They'll be gone by sunrise." "What about you?" I asked. "I'm going down there one last time. Gotta make sure the old locks are still holding. You don't need to follow me. Go home and have a good rest. If I'm not back by dawn, become the new guardian. Connor, Parcel 23 needs your help." And with that, Vernon turned around and walked toward the drilling rig. I barely slept at home. My head was buzzing with a swarm of thoughts. With the first rays of the sun, I gathered all what I needed and drove to Parcel 23. The site was empty and quiet. Vernon's trailer was open. Inside, on the table, there was a signed order to transferring me to the position of site manager. I walked all over Parcel and found only a symbol painted on the ground, near the drilling rig, a crude eye with a vertical slit through it, but now with 6 dolly marks. It seemed as if this symbol had been drawn in blood. That morning, I took Vernon's place and became the 7th guardian of Parcel 23. Now it's my turn to protect this world from the ancient horrors of the abyss, even if it costs me my life.